We've looked at some challenges with accurately counting GDP, or the size of our economy. Now let's look at things that are not included in GDP. So when we talk about GDP, we're either talking about GDP in terms of the income approach, so wages, interest, rent, and profits, or we are talking about GDP in terms of who buys those goods, so C plus I plus G plus X minus IM. Okay. Now, when we measure GDP, there are certain things that are not in GDP. The first is the sale and purchase of financial transactions, so stocks and bonds. That's because these don't represent really anything being produced. We're just changing who is holding the money. Okay. When we do count it in GDP, would be if you are paying an investment broker or someone to manage your investments for you, in which case they are providing you a service, and that is included in GDP. But if we're simply looking at the purchase of financial transactions or stocks and bonds, we're just moving around the money. We're not making new stuff. The second thing that's not counted in GDP is transfer payments. Remember, transfer payments are where the government pays you. So that could be EI or CPP, AISH, other types of subsidies. So in this case, the transfer payments, we're just moving the money around again. We haven't created any new goods or services. We're just changing who has the cash within the economy. Same thing with private transfer payments. So if you have a long-lost uncle who gives you $1,000, okay, then money has gone from his pocket to your pocket, but new income hasn't been created in the economy. New goods and services haven't been created in the economy. So transfer payments are not included. All right, let's look at number 3, which is the sale of used goods. So let's suppose that you have an old Honda Civic and you're selling it on Kijiji. When you sell that Honda Civic on Kijiji, it is not included in GDP. It was included in GDP the year that Honda Civic was brand new, built, and sold. When we're moving around used goods, we're not creating new stuff, we're just changing where it's located. And so it's not included in gross domestic product. Also not included in gross domestic product is anything that's an underground activity. So it's unlikely that you're going to call Revenue Canada and say, hey, government, I'm making $1 million selling drugs. Maybe I'm selling cocaine. You're not going to report that. And since you're not reporting it, it's not being included in gross domestic product. So illegal activities like prostitution, like the sale of drugs, even though we're producing a good or a service, it has value, people are paying for it, it's not included in GDP because it's not a legally recognized activity. And people aren't reporting it on their taxes. Other things that might be legal activities, but aren't being reported, they're going to impact GDP as well. So, for example, if you make money babysitting, maybe you do that when you were in high school, or you made money mowing the lawn, if you didn't report it in a tax return, even though it's a legal activity, then it doesn't get included in GDP. The other thing we have to consider is the impact of illegal immigrants who might be working illegally for cash under the table. So in this case, because they are not legally allowed to work, they are not reporting it on tax returns, and so it's not being included in gross domestic product, even though it has an impact on the economy. For example, if you look in the US, it's estimated that in the US, there are up to 11 million illegal immigrants in the US. and the value of what they produce in terms of total goods and services is somewhere around $25 billion. So of course it's an estimate because they're not reporting it, but it's almost 2% of their gross domestic product that is not being included in their GDP because it's not being reported, because the people who are doing it, who are producing these goods and services, are not legally allowed to work, even though they are. And so in the US right now, there's a big debate about illegal immigrants and what you should do with them. Should you kick them out, send them home? Should you have a path to citizenship? And what should be done there? Well, the thing to consider is, what impact does that have on the economy? If you made them legal citizens, then those 11 million people would all be paying taxes. And everything produced by those 11 million people, that $25 billion worth of goods and services, would then be included in gross domestic product and change the size of the economy. The same thing is true if we, for example, legalize drugs. So in a year, the Canadian government is planning to legalize the sale of marijuana. US states have already done that. So for example, Colorado, Washington, they legalized the sale of marijuana. And when they did that, the sheer effort to legalize it meant that now those companies are paying taxes. Now that revenue is being reported to the government, and the economy of Colorado, for example, grew 1% in a year just from legalizing the sale of marijuana. So starting to report those illegal activities, or those underreported legal activities because certain people aren't allowed to do them, that can grow the size of your economy. So the question is it worth it? Is it worth doing to get that economic growth? The last thing not included in GDP is any non-market activities. So in these cases, they're the things that we're doing that are producing a good or a service, but because we aren't paying for them, they are not included in gross domestic product. So the common example is, what if you have a housekeeper? So if you pay the housekeeper, then they're making income, you're paying for a service, it's included in gross domestic product. But what if you married your housekeeper? If you were married to your housekeeper, then they would clean your house, but now they're no longer making an income doing it, so that's no longer reported to the Canadian government, and you're no longer paying for it, at least on money, so it's no longer included in gross domestic product. So if everyone had a housekeeper and then they married them, the economy would decrease. So non-market activities, even though you are making a good or providing a service, because you're not paying for it and that's not being reported, it's not included in GDP. So this would include any housework or contributions you're making to your family. Instead of outsourcing it and hiring someone to watch the kids, you're watching your own kids, not included in GDP, even though it has value and you could pay someone to do it. Volunteer services, so if you're helping to build a house for Habitat for Humanity, you're walking a dog for the SPCA, what you are doing, that service has value, but because you're not being paid for it, it's not included. If you regrout your bathroom, you do your own home repairs instead of hiring someone else, not included in GDP.